Welcome, everybody. All right, today we are talking about turn ons in a relationship. Now, turn ons are sexual, but they're also turn ons are connections. It's intimacy and it's connected and it's friendship. It's emotional intimacy. It's physical intimacy. And it's all kinds of things that adds ingredients that makes your life go so much better and your communication improve so much. It is a huge thing to have turn-ons in your relationship because it makes you want to be together. Relationships thrive on emotional and physical connections. One of the most intriguing parts of romantic bonds is the concept of a turn-on. But what does it really mean to be turned on? In a relationship, it's purely physical or does it go deeper? The phrase turn on is often associated with physical attraction. However, as I said before, in relationships, it encompasses a whole lot more. A turn on can be anything emotional, intellectual, or sensory. It sparks attraction, it sparks excitement, deeper feelings for your partner. It's sparked oftentimes by pure vulnerability, the ability to open yourself up in all kinds of different ways to where you become a fascinating person. Now, in the meaning of love, turn on is the qualities or actions that make someone feel emotionally and physically drawn to their partner. A turn on in a relationship is specific behaviors, traits, situations that increase romantic or sexual desire between partners. And the meaning in a relationship of a turn on is the state of feeling heightened attraction, the arousal due to your partner's actions, words, or presence. Now, if you look beyond physical attraction, it's a common turn on. Emotional and psychological factors play an equally important role. Here's how. So, an emotional turn on, some people are deeply turned on by emotional intimacy. So, something like deep conversations that create a mental connection, or acts of kindness like surprise gestures and thoughtful words, gift baskets, feeling understood and valued. And then let's say an intellectual turn on. For many, intelligence and wit are major turn ons in a relationship. Engaging in stimulating debates, sharing interests and passions, being able to laugh, being able to find joy, a partner's ability to hold meaningful conversations. These are big deals if you can have that in a relationship. Now, physical turn ons like a person's smile, a voice, a scent, a physical touch, maybe their butt, maybe other things, their boobs, maybe their how they, how big their chest is, whatever. These things are very important. Holding hands is also stuff, like physical things like touching and cuddling. Sometimes your style, your confidence, your body language are what make you physically turned on. Also, psychological turn ons, a partner's ambition, their drive, are they protective or nurturing? Do they have a sense of humor? Are they playful? These are very important ingredients to people as far as turn ons. And there's real life examples in relationship, like the power of words. Like a person feels most turned on when their partner compliments them on their intellect rather than their looks, or there's emotional validation that strengthens their bond. Also, small gestures can have a huge impact, like gratefulness. You might find it incredibly turned on when your partner plans a surprise date. When it's not about money, it's the effort and the thoughtfulness that excites them. And then there's other thing like physical chemistry. If someone's scent or the way they touch your hand are major turn-ons, it creates an instant spark. Turn on, the meaning in a relationship when attraction shifts. Sometimes partners say, "You turn me on." But what if feelings change? The phrase turn on me can imply a shift in attraction, either growing stronger or fading. Why do turn ons change? Well, the familiarity and the novelty over time, The same gestures may lose their effect unless couples, keep exploring new experiences. Also, personal growth. As people evolve, their turn ons may shift, and what excited them at 20 may differ at 30 and 40. Also, emotional changes, stress, unresolved conflicts, emotional distance can really dampen attraction. But what really dampens attraction is resentment and the lack of forgiveness. And God only knows there's a vast population of people who have nothing to do with understanding what forgiveness is. And yet they keep breeding and they keep dragging people into their lives. How do you keep that spark alive? You have to understand your partner's turn ons. Turn ons in a relationship vary. Ask and observe. If that's what you want in a partner, if that's what you want to have for a partner, you have to ask and observe. You have to have open conversations. What makes you feel most connected to me? There's the 5 love languages. It may be physical intimacy. It may be buying gifts. It may be spending time together. It may be words of affirmation. God only knows, but you need to find out what it is that makes that partner turned on by you. What is their love language? What is the pathway to their heart? Notice what lights up your partners, certain words, touches, activities. If you have somebody who's into physical intimacy and you dress like you're a dumpster, you're probably not going to be very much of a turn on for your partner. If you're wearing baggy clothes and you're not taking care of yourself and you're all floppy and nasty looking and you have bad breath, you barely take care of yourself, you barely shower, and their idea of physical intimacy is their love language, you're a terrible partner. You also have to experiment together. You have to try new ideas, hobbies, romantic gestures. Explore each other's love languages, words of affirmation, acts of service. These are big deals. Balance emotional and physical intimacy. That's another thing you have to do if you want to embellish a turn on. You deepen your emotional bonds through vulnerability. If you're one of these stoic Pacific Northwest turds who can't even carry on a conversation, you're probably not too good at turn-ons. You're probably good at it in your head while you're jacking off to pornography, but you're probably not too good at it when it comes to dealing with your partner because everything you think about them is in your head and you don't even communicate it. You really have to understand that physical attraction is a big deal. Hugs, kisses, intimate moments. These are important in relationships. If you're going to be with your partner, you need to enter in that 2-foot zone, that body space, to remind each other that that real estate belongs to us. This is us. We are intimate together. That is your brain's mapping that I belong to you. If you're never entering that space with each other, if you're never touching each other, you're really not giving the I love yous that you need to give. Physical I love yous, like a kiss on the forehead, a touch on the back. I'm not saying you're going to be grabbing their vagina to go to bed. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about touch. I'm talking about simple kiss, a touch on the back, a hug, very simple, not lingering and gross, but something very fleeting and quick is a reminder that you love each other, and it's more powerful than the words. You want to avoid, if you want to be a person that turns on your partner, you want to avoid the common turnoffs. Neglect, lack of appreciation, constant criticism really kills attraction. Not sexy. Complacency, never putting effort into the relationship, dulls the spark. If you're a lazy ass, if you're somebody that never does what you say you're going to do, if you're somebody that acts like a child, if you're somebody that's passive aggressive and you stuff everything and then you act like a monster when you demonstrate your emotions because you never talk about your feelings, you're going to have problems. Not a lot of turn-ons with people like that. What is the true meaning of turn on when you're in love? A turn on in a relationship isn't just about lust. It's about what makes your heart race, your mind engage, your soul feel connected, whether it's shared laughter, a passionate kiss. God forbid you have a passionate kiss or a deep conversation. These moments define attraction in love. They're surprisingly engaging. You know, a deep kiss, a real kiss, where you're swirling your tongues around and having a good that is your souls connecting with each other. That is a very intimate thing to do, to match your faces up with each other and kiss and taste each other's tongues. How gross is that? Can't believe it. But it's a very powerful thing when it comes to intimacy. Understanding what a turn on is in a relationship is very important. You can nurture a stronger, more fulfilling bond with your partner. You want to keep exploring, communicating, appreciating each other. Because the best relationships are those that keep turning each other on in every way possible. That is your job in a relationship, is to turn your partner on. That is part of the work, and it's part of your work to find ways to turn yourself on with your partner. Experts tend to agree that there are five key, largely universal elements of attraction. And one of them, is helping clients with relationships and sexuality. So, familiarity, proximity breeds attraction. Just like the more you hear a song, the catchier it becomes. The more often you bump into the same person at the gym, the more your fondness tends to grow. This is a part of a turn on. This is part of attraction, is proximity. Similarity. This can include things like educational level, interest, looks, goals. Sure, it's convenient to share a passion for Thai food, but if you think about it, people are drawn to us because we believe, correctly or not, that our shared attributes reflect something deeper about us. This person is my kind of person and sees things like I do. That is a big, big attraction. It's also, you have to understand, what is it that breaks people up in a relationship? Well, here's the bottom line: incompatibility and the unwillingness to talk about why you are incompatible for me and why I am incompatible for you. The more you talk about it, the more compatible you can be if you want to. Otherwise, you break up and go find somebody you are similar to. Physical attractiveness. This is a big deal. What it actually means can vary across cultures, generations, even people at different points in their lives and relationships. While we'd like to think it's only on the inside that counts, that's a bunch of crap. Physical attractiveness matters, in part because it's an evolutionary perspective in our genes, it's in our makeup. The appearance gives us clues about a prospect's age and health, for instance. So too can their scent and their sound. People get pretty accurately detect characteristics from cooperativeness, body size, to in a potential partner, listening to their voice. This is a big deal. Attraction and communication, it's called meta communication. Nonverbal communication is 70% of all communication. Another thing that is a part of what makes us attracted is reciprocity. And this is the concept that you're more apt to like someone you feel likes you. That's why people getting into pornography destroy their relationship, because it's a one-way street. It has no reciprocity. It's just you glancing at something that you want to have, and it doesn't have to respond to you. And some people, that becomes their sex life, is jacking off to pornography. It's really sad because they don't have real human interaction. But some people just want to live that way and die that way because they're so, I don't want to be hurt, that they'll get married, they'll have kids, and they'll exist because they're children in their marriage and have no intimacy whatsoever, simply because they can jack off to pornography, and that does it for them, because they don't have to be hurt. They can't be hurt by the pornography, but they can be hurt by this other person in their life. When the factor fades of reciprocity, your relationship also dies. When you put a lot of effort into something and you get nothing in return in a way that's meaningful to you, it tends to fizzle out. Another thing that keeps things alive on a turn on perspective is responsiveness. Despite the dating advice to play hard to get to, or wait a few days to call someone back, you know, people who were less responsive were rated as less attractive. If you're a responsible person and you respond to people's communication, you are a turn on already, even if you're 500 pounds and kind of gross. So the role of biology also plays a big element in attractiveness. Of course, what turns you on may not be the same as your best friend is. However, some preferences appear to be hardwired over the millennia of human existence. There's a lot of research that they find that in general, men prefer physically attractive young partners, while women prefer older, financially stable partners, even in cultures with more gender equality. For men, emphasizing looks and youth may reflect an evolutionary desire to pass on genes. Women's higher premium on wealth, meanwhile, may be related to their evolutionary need for support in their childbearing years. It's kind of like looking at those nature shows when the birds are flopping their feathers, the males are doing their dances and flopping their feathers around. Whoever's got the most is probably the one that's going to get the chick. Pre-birth control is likely that women spend most of their reproductive years either pregnant or lactating. And those things just require a huge amount of resources in terms of food and energy and time. And so men are looking for someone who is physically attractive because they know it's going to blow up after they have kids and probably stay blowed up all the way to the end if they're really pissed at their husbands. Preferences are also personal. Some aspects of attraction are universal. Turn-ons, turn-offs, or repeat are deeply personal. On an individual basis, things like your current situation, past experiences can play a big role in who catches your eye. You know? For many people, it's their body shape. Many people, it's the butt. Many people, it's their package. Many people, it's their breast or their chest. Many people, it's their face and their lips or their eyes. It's really important that people often model their own attractions after what their role models sought out growing up. For better or worse, we learn what is rewarding in relationships at a very young age by those people who are important to us. Sometimes that instinct is subconscious. Women with a lot of body hair might be very unattractive or attractive. If a person doesn't know why until they remembered, that maybe they're attracted to some hairy women because maybe their nanny was hairy, or maybe their mom was hairy, or maybe there's somebody they were attracted to was hairy at some point, or maybe they saw a movie or a picture where there was a hairy woman and they got all excited and they masturbated and woohoo, and now all of a sudden they want hairy women. God only knows, because everybody's got their little quirks and they got their obsessions, and those obsessions often change over time. All right, we're going to take a quick break and we're going to come right back. Welcome back, everybody. All right, we're talking about turn ons in relationships. All of us should really sit back and think, how did I learn that muscles or tallness was important to me? What does that really mean to me? If it means protection, for example, open your mind to people who make you feel safe, regardless of their stature. Ask yourself, am I just not feeling it right away, or is it a total turnoff? And if you're just not feeling it on the first date, in the first few minutes or the hour, physical traits can grow on you if you give it time. For instance, it's very interesting that when people pick each other, all of a sudden, you're my girlfriend, you're my boyfriend. When people pick each other, it creates a chemical ignition in your brain that says, hey, I got to make this person attractive. So suddenly somebody who may have been kind of mediocre to you becomes highly attractive because your brain starts shaping a way to be physically attracted to that person. Now, women do this a hell of a lot better than men. Women can turn an ugly toad into a highly sexy romantic guy because they have the ability and the creativity to find ways to be attracted to a turd. It's amazing that they could do that. Guys don't do that as well as women do. But you can find a way to turn somebody into somebody you're attracted to in your brain. And oftentimes that is exactly what the honeymoon phase is. It's like two magnets that get stronger and stronger, magnet and metal that get stronger and stronger and stronger together because you keep finding ways to be more and more attracted to each other. And in that, you start not looking at the things you should look at that are the red flags that this may be a turd and I probably am going to regret this decision down the road. That honeymoon phase is very delusional because you're trying to make this person attractive because they picked me. You picked me? I can't believe you picked me. Since you picked me, now I find you really sexy. That's how the brain works. You know, for women, the biggest turn-ons are often very different. For every woman, but generally, there's a lot of things that are very important to women. Arouse sexual interest is a huge ingredient of a turn on for a woman. Engaging in foreplay, stimulating their mind, or exciting their senses. There's a lot of big turn-ons for women if you're a man. Emotional turn-ons for women are a big deal. No matter your reason for wanting to know what turns women on, you got to think about it. Complimenting her is a number one. It's a first. It's first place in what you want to do. And it may sound basic, but who doesn't love flattery, especially coming from someone you care about? If you want to turn on a woman, complimenting her on her looks, her intelligence, her personality traits are a humongous deal if you want to be that kind of person. The other thing that is vastly important for women is communication. It's one of the biggest turn-ons for women is a partner who can communicate. And that means vulnerability. I'm not talking about what's for dinner or where do we go or, what kind of shows do you like or what kind of movies do you like. I'm talking about, hey, I'm feeling kind of this way about that person or, hey, I'm feeling this or I'm feeling that. Feelings are a very vulnerable place. That's what women appreciate. It also helps couples squash arguments on the spot, is communication. And communication is about, if you're going to be in a relationship, it's about understanding. It's not about being right. If you're one of these turds that gets defensive every time you hear something you don't like or you have to correct somebody like some weird autistic person, you're going to have some problems in relationships. You need to shut the hell up and validate. That's your job. If you want to be a turn on, shut your trap and validate feelings. Validate what you're seeing. Compliment. Make observations that are nice and generous and kind. These are important things if you want to be a turn on. But if you're going to be well, that's not exactly what I said. I said something. No, I don't think you have that right. No, that's not how it happened. You're so wrong about this. If you're one of those turds, you're already a turn off. You're a turn off to the world. People who are listeners are in charge of the conversation, not the person talking, the listener. So if you want to be sexy, shut your mouth and validate and have good questions and learn more about your partner. That's a turn on. Make her feel important. What turns a person on is feeling like they're the number one in your life. It's called cherish, which is the main ingredient that women need in a relationship. If you don't cherish them, they wonder what the hell you are cherishing. Is it your golf game? Is it the chick you're working with? Is it your Facebook friend from childhood? What the hell is it that you're cherishing? Because it sure as hell isn't me. When men don't understand what cherish is, they don't understand how to have a relationship. So what is cherish? I can't be the man I am without her. I don't even know why she's with me. I'm lucky to have her. She's my best friend, and it's that way when I'm with her. It's that way when I'm not with her. I'm so proud to be with her. If you're one of those guys that communicates that kind of way, you're talking a woman's language. Now, if you're a woman, for a man, he's going to read the value of the relationship on another ingredient that's very similar and much a part of cherish, and that's called respect. Respect is being heard. That's not agreed with, that's being heard. Okay, so what you believe is this, this, this. What you like is this, this, this. What you believe about me is this, this, this. Yes, when you're able to be a listener, you are a respectful person, and that means that you are a turn on to your partner. If you're a woman who shuts your husband down, you are an ogre. You are Shrek. You are gross, and it's really hard to be with you. If you're not a person, if you can't hear your husband and at least allow him to have a voice, you have demasculated him. Men, if you cannot cherish your wife, you have taken their womanhood away. Why in the hell would she wreck her body and breed and have all these kids and destroy her whole self image for you right off the bat when you get married in the very beginning and divest in herself enormously and then have to raise them by herself while you're off at work acting like some gallant human being? If you're not cherishing your wife and all the things that she sacrifices, what the hell are you doing? Are you a kid? Give me a break. Why would someone be married if you can't cherish your wife? Guys, that's your job. That is what you do. You put her first so she feels secure. That is the job. Women, if you're going to be married to a man, you may not like his opinions. You may think all the things he likes are stupid, but if you know what to buy him at the store, you know what he likes or doesn't like, that means you listen. You're a good person. Now, a lot of women think they're great listeners, but they really suck and they're really turnoffs, and especially in this day and age where they demasculate men left and right, especially all the liberal crazies and all these, progressives. Oh my God, this is crazy. If I see orange hair, I know that's not a good listener. Not a person that I want to be around. No, no, no. They just they think they know everything. That's their little bright light to let you know that I know everything and you know nothing. All right, you want to listen. It's the biggest turn on is a partner who can listen. This means putting away your phone and all these other distractions that might be keeping you from giving your full attention. Sharing your fantasies. This is a huge deal for turn ons. If you want to turn someone on, you share your fantasies. This is also a naughty way to gain insight into each other's deepest thoughts. It makes for great mental foreplay. I got to tell you, another turn on is helping out around the house because who wants to be with a lazy ass? That is not sexy. If you got one of these turds that procrastinates, I'll mow the lawn this weekend and then they don't. I'm going to take care of my chores and they don't. That's a turn off. Turn off. Gross. Who wants to be with an irresponsible liar? Helping out around the house is a huge turn on. When asked, what turns on a woman? Some woman may respond, when my partner folds the laundry, when my spouse takes care of the kids so I can relax. That is a turn on. Guys, you don't get that, but it's important. It's a big deal. For some reason, women, love caring gestures. This is an important thing because it makes them feel very special, but men do too. Also, verbal teasing is another turn on. Dirty talk, specific words that turn, women on will depend on, the person. Start with something simple and naughty. Send her a frisky text telling her what you want to do to her when you get home, or you can ramp things up or keep them vague or suggest based on how they respond. But that doesn't mean your whole relationship is about getting in the bed and having sex. Some men think that. That's all they think about is, I just have to have sex. And just, if you're going to be one of those turds, you are an empty shell. I'm talking about intimacy. Intimacy is much more than just sex. Intimacy is I love you, I love you, I love you. The more you do that, the more secure you are. Here's the deal. Why in the world would two people be together without feelings? The only reason people are choose to be married is how they feel about each other. That is the important ingredient. If you don't embellish your feelings for each other and hear how each other feels instead of who did you talk today? What did you do? What did you have to eat? You know, if you're one of these turds that has these stupid conversations about your day's events, you're not married. If you want to be really intimate in your marriage, talk about your feelings. How do you feel about this movie? How do you feel about what you read the other day? How do you feel about what's on TV? How do you feel about the kid's teacher? How do you feel about this, that, the other? How do you feel about this for dinner? Feelings. That's what a relationship is about. You know, another turn on is a family man. You know, for a woman, now men think, oh my God, that's got to be a total turn on. No, it's a total turn on for a woman, you know, watching their husbands caring for their kids. If you want to make your way into a woman's heart, treat their kids right, treat your kids right, and you will be a sexy man. You know, it isn't a physical turn on, but it's a heightened emotional response that makes her want to be closer to you because you care about what she cares about. Also, flirting. Flirting is all about knowing what to say. You know, it's a fun and sexy way to let your partner know how much you want them. Nobody doesn't want to be in a most people do not want to be in a marriage where you're not told how much you're wanted and how much you're needed. That's an important ingredient to turn-ons. You also want to be genuine. The more stable your relationship, the bigger the turn on. When you're stable and genuine with your partner, you feel free to be wild as you want to be without judgment. That means you're about understanding each other. That means you're about learning about what's meaningful to you and what's meaningful to me are very different, yet I care enough about you to put that on the forefront of what I do. You know, you also, you know, men are terrible at this, but setting the mood. It's another turn on that setting the right mood when you're trying to initiate something sexy, you know, put some music on, light some candles, show a wild night of romance, make some plans, make some real plans. Don't just make fake plans. These are important things to do if you want to be turned on in a relationship. It's very, very important. You know, also, you know, being a good spouse. You know, one of the biggest turn-ons is being a good spouse. You know, selfish people are the worst. You know, if all you know, I need to go take a shower. Oh, well, I need to take a shower. Okay, if you're one of these people that you care about yourself before everybody else, that's not a very good partner. You know, you have to understand that in marriage, if you're one of these people that is always parenting your partner and treating them like a child, you're a turnoff. You know, if you didn't wash the dishes, you didn't do this. You know, if you're one of these people that sits around picking on your partner and all the things that you perceive that they don't do, and you have no desire to pick out any genuinely good thing about them. Oh, I did the other day. I did it 2 weeks ago. I said this. While you did after the 2 weeks, you sat around and pelted them with enormous amount of negativity. You're a turnoff. Negative people are turnoffs. I'm not saying be blindly optimistic. I'm saying be kind, be genuine. You know, the most attractive feature in any human being is the idea that you are a person that is grateful. You know, grateful people in this life are very hard to find. Negative, picking you apart people, especially in marriage, are the hardest people on this earth to want to be with. It is so hard to live with a partner that picks you apart all day long, every day of your life. Yet that's what people do because they build resentment. And the other thing is victim themes. Victim themes are a total turnoff. You did this to me. They did this to me. If you're one of these people that walks around making yourself a victim all day long, like every narcissist on the planet who marries codependent people, Narcissists gaslight by making themselves a victim of everything on the planet. They take no accountability for anything they say or do. They don't believe in anybody else's perception but their own. And if you have a perception, they're going to rebuke it in any way, shape, form, or fashion that they can. They are going to put you down. They're going to make you crazy, and they're going to piece you apart and tear you apart. Boy, aren't they narcissists are the grossest people on the planet. But the other ones that are gross are the codependents who put up with them. But the deal is, negative people are highly, highly turn off people. Not sexy at all. One of the biggest turnoffs is, being selfish. They're always headed for the finish line without a thought. People in marriage are about the journey. They're not about the outcomes. If you want a great marriage, you have to be about vesting in the journey of your life, not making every moment of your life the destination. You always do this to me. You never do this to me. If you're one of those people, you are a destination oriented person. You don't believe about living in between the lines. You don't know what gray means. All you are is black and white. Everything is either this or that. You walk around judging like all the liberal pansy asses in this world. And the deal is that, you're easily judgmental and you can pick everybody apart. Great. That's easy. That's stupid. It's easy. It's harder to be grateful. The other problem is a total turnoff is these people that have confirmation bias. Well, I think you're a total jerk. So everything that they hear in your conversations, no matter how nice you are, no matter how kind you are, no matter how grateful you are, no matter what a great day you have provided, no matter all of your generosity, all they can hear is that you're a terrible person, and those are the things they pull apart. You're selfish. You're whatever the narrative is about you, the only thing that they listen for is what they can cherry pick to define you. And it's usually about 2% of all communication. They're going to pick that apart and they're going to remember it for 40 years and bring it up all the time as if that's who you are all the time. Nobody is that all the time. We are gray, gray, gray. Gray as can be. We are not black and white. We never will be black and white because we're human beings. But black and white thinkers are more black and white, and they're very difficult to be with because they're not sexy at all because they have no imagination. They have to protect themselves by making everything black and white. They are unsafe in this world. People who are unsafe are not sexy. People who are judgmental are not sexy. People who care and understand, people who are willing to hear other people's points of view, people who care about other people are very sexy in this life. All right, we're going to take another break and we're going to come right back. Welcome back, everybody. All right, we're talking about turn ons in a relationship. Being a giving partner to your husband or wife is a very big turn on. If you have a partner who is a giving person, that means they think about you. That means they spend their days often thinking about what will make your life better. That's a big deal. That's why when you get a text from your partner at any given time and they're saying, "How was your day? How did this meeting go? How did how did lunch go? How was your drive?" That means you're thinking about your partner. That is a big deal. That is an act of giving. And it is a turn on to know that your partner cares. Knowing, that you want to make sure that someone is satisfied, that someone is kind, that's a big deal. If you're in a sexual relationship with your partner and knowing that they are satisfied sexually is a big deal. It's a very important ingredient. It means taking your time, especially with intimacy, kissing, foreplay, letting your pleasure be their pleasure. It's important. Studies show that people often report lower rates of sexual satisfaction earlier in their relationship and higher sexual satisfaction later. And that's oftentimes because women have to spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to make this turd that they married attractive. And that's a big challenge. It's a big challenge for women. I feel bad for them, to have to make that man body look sexy. Yuckola. Wow. It's really important also to understand that turn-ons are a very powerful ingredient. Picking up after yourself is a turn on, God forbid. Can you imagine that? That's a turn on. Being picking up, especially when you're putting things away, taking care of yourself, cleaning as you go. That's an ingredient that says you have self-discipline. It's a very important part. But and another way of picking up is picking up your partner. Showing up when something is important for them. Being there, being present when they need you. Showing up for your kids. That's a big turn on that you're somebody that cares about your children. It's amazing. Spending time is another turn on. It's one of the biggest turn ons for women, especially spending quality time together. Couples who spend time together on regular date nights have less stress, which leads to better sex and higher rates of sexual satisfaction. But if you carry resentments, you're probably not going to have that. If you resent each other for being selfish, if you resent each other for a whole lot of things, if you're one of these terrible, resentful person that has 8,000 reasons not to love you, you make life really hard. And you're not a very sexy person. Resentment is not sexy. Dropping resentment and moving on is very sexy. Forgiveness is very sexy. What is forgiveness? It's the ability to look at someone's intentions and understand their intentions and care about their intentions rather than their outcomes. If you're one of these jerks that sits around beating on, "You did this to me, you did this I will remember for the rest of my life that you did this." If you're one of those people, you're ridiculous. It is hard to be around you. You are not a person that is sexy. You're not a person that is going to turn anybody on because you can't forgive. Forgiveness is the willingness to look at people's intentions, because most of the time, people have really good intentions with really bad outcomes. Not all the time, because we're human and we do bad things and we are bad people. But, spending time is a big deal. And that is something that we need to do together and we need to want to do together. But that means we have to be nice to each other and be safe with each other emotionally and physically. Caring about each other, spending time together makes a relationship stronger. Also, having a sense of humor, having a great sense of humor is one of the biggest turn-ons for people. Research shows that couples who laugh together feel more supported and satisfied in their relationship. They feel supported by their partner. It allows them to loosen up in and outside of the bedroom. That's a very important thing, to be able to look at life and not take everything so serious. To be able to look at the funny things, to be able to look at the angles, the different ways in which people might view things. To be able to laugh in a relationship is a very powerfully healing thing. You also need to know what you do with your hands. If you're one of these handsy people and you put your hands in the wrong places, you better watch it. Your hands often can go in places they shouldn't be going. If you're scratching your crotch in the middle of a baseball game and everybody, 60,000 people and plus whatever's on TV is staring at you scratching your crotch, you probably got a little problem there. The deal is that we have to watch where we put our hands. Yes, you have to be a little mindful because turn-ons and turn-offs can be very much about gestures and how you use your hands and what you do with your hands. Are you invading people's space with your hands? Are you doing things with your hands, with your own body? What are you doing and what are your hands exploring while you're not thinking? This can be a very, very scary thing for people. It's a very important thing to keep in mind. You know, if you're going to approach sex and intimacy, you want to approach it with appreciation. You know, Appreciation is mutual, initiations of sex is a very good technique. A relationship where sex is approached and openly and honestly appreciated are key factors to people having orgasms. People being able to talk about sex is a huge ingredient. These weirdos that don't talk about sex and then in the middle of the night they lay on top of you and start pumping. That is not sexy. That's kind of gross. And that's kind of like, ew, are you a predator or what? You know, you need to talk about your sex life. That's an important thing to do. Not complain about your sex life. Talk about what could make your sex life better. What can make your intimate life better? But men, you need to be listening to listen, not listening to get them in bed. That's a very important thing. Giving each other massages. Physical touch is one of the biggest turn ons for people. Plus, research shows that physical affection, like receiving a massage or hugging or holding hands, is very strongly related to sexual satisfaction. Well, are you surprised? You know, Not being afraid of a little help is a very noble thing. It's a turn on. Being a person that asks for help is a turn on. God forbid, using intimate toys can be turn ons. They can be especially helpful for people who have trouble reaching orgasm or getting wet, so it's not painful. Don't be intimidated by toys. You can be excited by them. They can be, just looking at that vibrator makes me think about sex. Woohoo! God forbid. This life is very short. We have to help each other out. There are things that can help each other out. And when people have toys, they have the ability to communicate about sex openly. That is an important thing to do. We are sexual creatures. We need to talk about these things. Now, another turn off is the ED guys. Well, ED guys are usually guys that masturbate to pornography a lot. And by doing that, their penis is less stimulated because they're so busy finding pictures of whatever they're looking at attractive that they're not looking at their spouse who's probably not anywhere near what the picture they're looking at, and they're finding themselves unattracted to their spouse and attracted to what they look at in pornography, which often evolves into very specific things as they keep going in deeper and deeper into it. ED is a byproduct of masturbation. A lot of people don't say that, but it is the truth. A lot of it has to do with their divergent sexual nature and their divergent and highly specific sexual desires have made them unattractive to each other because they are not connected to each other in an emotional way. Emotional connection makes for great intimacy. Being confident. One of the biggest turn-ons for women is confidence. And also for men. It's great to ask, someone if they're enjoying something. But you don't have to ask every 5 seconds. Just listen and look. Are they breathing heavy, or does their body seem to be reacting to what's going on? That's an important thing. Many guys are oblivious to what a woman is going through when they're trying to go through intimacy. And when the woman is not responding to you and they're not really breathing heavily and they seem to be like, get it over with, that's a sign that you're probably not emotionally connected. And if you're one of these guys that complains about it, them not being emotionally connected, you got a big problem. Because if you're not emotionally connected, you're probably not a person that turns someone on. Confidence is not arrogance. Confidence is like, think about it. If you were going to have surgery, would you not want your surgeon to be confident in their ability to do the surgery? That's what you want in a person. Not that they are an expert, that they have to walk around like a peacock showing off their talent. I'm not talking about that. What I'm talking about is understanding I do some things really, really well in this life. There is nothing wrong with that. When you can be a good provider, you should be proud of that. When you are good at taking care of children, you should be proud of that. When you are an expert in areas in your life, you should be confident in those areas and you have every right to be confident, but you don't have every right to shove it down people's throat. Confidence is a huge, huge turn on. Huge turn on. Words are a huge thing about turning a person on or off. Yes, words. Phrases and words can heighten sexual encounters. Just know that there are also words that turn people off. The neck, by the way, is one of the 7 erogenous zones. Erogenous zones refer to areas of the body that are especially sensitive to sexual stimulation. The nape of the neck, which is the back, the base of your neck, is ranked a lot higher, especially with women, for sexual stimulation. And then the breasts and the nipples can also be high turn-ons for women. These are important things to understand if you want to turn a person on. Things that turn men on are diverse, ranging from emotional connection and confidence and physical touch and verbal affirmation. Many men are attracted to kindness, a good sense of humor. Confidence is a big one. Many men are drawn to a woman's self-assuredness and happiness with who she is. If you're one of these women that sits around, am I fat? Look at me. Oh my God, I can't believe I'm this gross. Blah 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 blah. My face is this. Oh, look at that woman. Oh, look at them. Blah 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 blah. If they're diverting and they don't think that they got anything going for them, that is not sexy. A sense of humor, a woman who can make a person laugh, share lighthearted moments is very valued because that means they're resilient. That means they have a sense of humor. That means they don't dwell on all the negative things in life like most liberal crazy women do. Presence and engagement. Listening and being present for him is a subtle but powerful way to show interest in a guy. To be heard as a guy is a great compliment. That is called respect. That doesn't mean you agree with him. You don't have to agree. You don't have to agree at all. You just validate that you understand. That's the only thing that you have to do. It's not that complicated. Independence and ambition in a woman is a huge thing. Codependent women are a total turnoff. Desperate women, total turnoff. An ambitious, independent woman who has her own life and goals is often considered a strong turn on. Also, a kind woman, warm, empathetic, kind disposition is a quality men find very, very, very attractive. Also, physical and sexual turn ons. Initiation, a woman making the first move in a sexual situation can be significant turn on. Also, verbal affirmation, using words, expressing he's doing a good job, telling him he's desired is very effective. Moaning, I guess, would be considered very effective. Also, appreciation, outwardly appreciating a man's effort with both big and small, makes him feel loved, fosters a deeper connection. Eye contact, especially intense eye contact, makes deep and engaging relationships with a man. Interest and confidence. That's what it signals. Also, a flirty touch. Accidental touches, grazes, deliberately playful contact creates intimacy. So these are very, very important things. Also, the ability to express joy, the ability to set boundaries. This is what I can do, this is what I can't do, and making a guy feel needed. That's turn ons. All right. That's our show. I want to thank you for listening. I love hearing from you. You can do that on our webpage, voiceamericamedia.com, and libsyn, LIBSYN.com, Dr. Gary Bell's Absurd Psychology. Now remember, do you have a dirty mind or a sexy imagination? Also, things only seem kinky the first time. Also, sex is the most fun you can have without laughing. That's a Woody Allen quote. Thank you for listening, everybody.